Welcome to this session of Tech Talent Talk. We are your hosts, Oliver and Birgit, and we have this series of events to bridge the gap between recruitment and engineering. Oliver, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Oliver, and I support startups, scale-ups, and agencies in hiring for sales, marketing, and tech.
And I'm Birgit. I work as a leadership coach and engineering leader. I advise people about creating high-performing teams through culture. We have a really interesting topic for you and also a really interesting guest. The topic is how to do effective communication, and our guest is Eugene Klushnikov. Eugene is a seasoned data engineer with a strong background in fast-paced tech startups. He recently joined Zalando as a principal data engineer, bringing his expertise in driving impactful insights and innovation. Before this, he was with Get Your Guide, where he led the engineering teams and contributed to key projects in marketing and marketplace. His blend of technical know-how and leadership experience allows him to deliver real-world results in complex environments. Eugene, I have a question for you. We're talking about effective communication. What is effective communication and why is it important to you?
Hi, Birgit. Hi, Oliver. Thank you very much for having me. And I see you want to start with the most difficult topic and the most difficult question right away, right? Okay, let's give it a thought. Shall we maybe align on what we mean by communication first, just to make sure that we are talking the same thing? What is it? What is communication for you, Birgit?
It's a way of delivering a message. And with this comes not only the message that I'm seeing and interpreting as like very transparent, there's also a sub-message always. So basically a human wants something and also at the same time hides something. So there is something that the human wants to have maybe from the other person, but while hiding some tiny little secrets about the person themselves who was trying to deliver the message will be somehow different. So I'm trying to put this here and not put too much information into it because it goes into a different direction of psychology that I like. This is like what is manipulation? So I'm sticking with this definition of communication. So there's a message that I try to convey to a person, but there's always a sub-message that leads back to what I really want.
This is very interesting that you're already adding some aspects of manipulative communication to the topic of communication itself. Oliver, what is it for you?
Very revealing, Birgit.
It's like that.
I would say yes, there is maybe something that the sender wants to hide, but I would like to add some of this might be intentional, some of this might be not intentional. And second, there's just not the verbal way to get a message across. There's also the non-verbal way, like mimic and the posture of your body. And this is sometimes even more important than the actual words that you would use. And from my experience, this is why written communication sometimes goes wrong, or because you lack the physical impression of the sender and also of the recipient. And the other way around, if you look at only verbal communication, like on the telephone, you also miss the important points, like from the physics of the sender. But at least you have the tonality of the voice that gives you an additional clue of how to interpret this message.
I really like it, Oliver, and I really like your points, Birgit, as well. Yeah, I'm a big fan of concise, probably the concisest definitions that I can come to. So I thought about it a lot. For me, communication is transmission of information between humans to achieve some goals. And I think like all those three parts are really important because, right, the communication is when we exchange information, right? And then between humans. So probably this is arguable, but probably we exclude communicating to our dogs or cats or to ourselves, journaling. So I would arguably say it's not communication. It is important, but it's not what I would include in scope here. And then it also assumes that we have some target. So it's not like, again, like sometimes I'm calling my mom and maybe we do not necessarily have the targets, but maybe we exclude that from our discussion as well and say there is professional communication, there is communication with our relatives, and maybe they're a little bit different. So it assumes the goal. And also it assumes the goal in your question, Birgit, because whenever we say effective, we mean that like there are effective and ineffective ways, and somehow they should be connected to a target. So let's say effective communication is the type of communication that helps us achieve our goals in a resource efficient manner. And I'm leaving some room.
Right.
I'm leaving some room for our discussion.
Let's have a discussion about it, because I brought in the into the communication, and you are definitely bringing in effective communication. And I would argue that with and without manipulation, you can have an effective communication, also by the definition that you brought in, to achieve a certain goal. Which means with manipulation, which means I'm giving you a message, but I actually want to have a different thing, but I don't deliver this message, this transparent message to you. So the transparency is hidden. I manipulate you in a certain way. I can still achieve a goal, the goal that I wanted with this type. What do you say about this?
This is absolutely right. The question is if we really want to do it with the people that we communicate to. Unfortunately, sometimes it's probably even more efficient to manipulate people and get what we want from them without revealing what we actually want, right? But yeah, I personally try to avoid that. And I think a lot of people around me try to avoid that towards me as well, because once we start doing that, we start risking trust and relationship.
Yeah. Let me be clear with what manipulation means also in the context of good and bad. There is manipulation, and in some books you can find the word white manipulation, and not maybe you can, on the different side, you can say black manipulation. So the negative manipulation that with the negative connotation that we know. The definition of this one is that you are being deceived, you are being surprised in a way, and being manipulated in a way that you didn't want to. But you can also be manipulated in a way that you say and think, hey, actually, this is good. I like that I was manipulated this way. An example, when you are walking on the street and there is a musician, like a street musician, who holds you back from walking further because you like this music. So your intention actually was to walk the way from A to B. In between, there was a musician who holds you back from walking from A to B because you're being manipulated to listen to this music. This is especially defined as manipulation because your intention wasn't to listen to this music. And so there was still someone who made you listen to this music. And so this type of definitions that is that you have for the white manipulation. So you can use manipulation for good if someone likes to be manipulated.
This is a very interesting example. And I often like to be manipulated by music on the street. I usually stop and try to listen.
Absolutely. But coming back to effective communication, how can we actually do effective communication? Let's also think about what bad communication would be in this effect. Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. I think we should always start with our goals, right? We already touched the goals a little bit, and we say communication should have a goal. Starting with that helps. And first of all, clarifying that to ourselves. Basically, before we start a new document, and there can be many different types of communication, right? We can write it down in a document, in a Slack message. We can, Oliver, as you've said, we can do it with our mimics and gestures, and they can be all different types of communication, right? We can also open our mouth and say something. That's probably the most typical way. I like to think that before we do that, we stop and think about what we are trying to achieve. And then that helps clearing things a little bit. And I had many cases in my career, but just like day-to-day work, that when I wanted to say something, but after thinking about that, I would actually change my mind and don't do that, or delay my message, or reshape it, or don't do it at all, because I would realize that saying exactly that at that time using this medium would not help me to achieve my goal.
Can you give us an example?
Let me think about it. I mean, there definitely can be examples. Like, I'm writing a couple of docs now as we speak, right, before meeting and after meeting as well. And sometimes there are sections that are supposed to be there, but they actually make me think about what kind of message I want to transmit there. And then I might even reach out to people saying like, hey, it is supposed that, like, maybe there is a template, right? It is supposed that I write this and that, but why do we need it? Why would people need to read that, to spend their time, to spend their mental capacity as well, and what kind of information it would give to them? And yeah, I think about it a lot.
Absolutely. So you also communicate a lot via documentation, right? And we are also communicating a lot via code reviews, comments inside the code, but we're also communicating inside Slack, but also a lot via calls and meetings, right? Do you have any examples in the other area where you see like some problematic communication?
I see it like everywhere, right? And I also contribute to that a lot, because communication is very, very difficult. And depending on the medium and like among all of those that you mentioned, I think the aspects of an effective communication can be different as well. Documents, for example, can tend to be long, especially now with the ChatGPT. You kind of submit a few bullet points and you ask to write X paragraphs, right? And it produces that in no time. So documents tend to be long, and probably the very typical problem there is the consistent narrative and also the concise language. That's what I try to pay attention a lot, and also encourage other people to pay attention to a lot of that. Channels like Slack, probably the typical problem there is the number of people, or like the group that is receiving that message. Because if we like type here and or all in the channel with a few hundred people, then like many of them probably would wonder why they even have to read that, or why they've been bothered with the message itself. In vocal communication, I think the context is the biggest challenge, because we have our thoughts, or we have our picture in mind, and probably the very typical mistake is to assume that the person in front of us has the same picture, has the same context, or share our beliefs as well. So we typically start saying things right away without checking our assumptions, is what they think about the problem is true. So yeah, I would say depending on the medium, tips or ways to come up to an effective communication are also different.
I have a workshop exercise that I really like to start with in order to talk about communication and also talk about biases. And maybe the audience would like to exercise with me. Please pause the video to have this amount of seconds that you need. Let me bring this in spontaneously. So the exercise about drawing something. So you need a pen and a paper. Please take this, pause the video if you don't have that. And the exercise is to, within 30 seconds, so please take your timer and set it up for 30 seconds. Within 30 seconds, please draw a square with 3 lines. A square with 3 lines. And so pause the video here. I will give you some solutions just right now. So what many people draw or like try to draw is an actual geometric square with 3 lines, leaving the fourth out. Some others try to draw this shape, this geometric shape, at the corner, at the edge of the paper. So, like, we can all think about also in terms of communication, also in terms of what we mean by that, what I have communicated. So basically, the receiver of the message is trying to like decrypt the message into something. We may also argue, hey, it is not possible. So, right, this is also an answer to this task. It is not possible. But we can also come to different types of meaning. So, for example, some people say, okay, I draw a square with 3 lines, whether it's inside or outside. So this is also, I must say, every of these things are correct because this is how we perceive the message. Most of the people, however, think of a square as a geometric type. And now comes the mathematician and draws the 3 lines, a 4, which is also a square, but in a different context. And when I reveal this answer to people who mainly think in a geometric type, they're irritated about it. And this is where the bias comes in. We think that the geometric answer is the only answer, whereas the number, the square, basically is also like the 4 of is a square of 2, right? So it's a square. It's also a correct answer. We just interpreted it differently. And that I find really fascinating, that even if I reveal this, and even if I explain what biases are, what we think about communication, that people still feel irritated about it. And so I say then, please enjoy this emotion that you have, because possibly you will have this in a different context when you are in meetings with your people and think about solutions that are not within the norm, right?
This is very interesting. And I also wonder where this irritation might come from.
Exactly.
That the fact that we miscommunicated something or misunderstood something, it also touches something deeply inside us, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Oliver, what's your thought on this?
I think it can be interpreted as a kind of rejection if we fail to understand an instruction or a question or an answer, or thought the way we think is the only possible solution to a problem. It is rejection, after all. It's the feeling of not belonging to the group in a certain way. And if we think of how rejection feels to the brain, rejection is an emotion, but it touches areas of the brain which are also linked to physical pain. So I think this is what makes communication so impactful. If done wrong, people feel excluded. And this is what causes even bigger troubles.
Mm-hmm. And when we think about, for example, sentences, Eugene, in our talk before this talk, you said there's an example of people, like when you ask someone, or like when you say, hey, there is this task to do, and you basically put it, you say this task is to do into the group. There is possibly someone who says, I can do it. What is your take on this one?
That's a very good question. Yeah, and we've discussed it briefly before the talk. And actually, I did my homework because I remember it was touching some cultural aspects as well, right? And indeed, I saw it a lot in my team, and I was actually giving this feedback to people that whenever there is a problem that we want to resolve, and we need someone to be assigned to that task, to own that task, right? And whenever someone says, I can do it, especially in a written communication, it wouldn't actually mean for me that the person took that assignment for themselves, right? So can, like I would probably interpret can as a physical ability or kind of an offering resources, but not necessarily committing to that. And I checked with that with native speakers, with a couple of people from the US specifically. I don't know if there are like differences between US, UK, Australia, but people from the US, whenever they say I can do it, they actually assign themselves to the task. So they accept it and they commit to spending time and resources to that. And that was that was an eye-opening discussion for me. So I actually started saying this myself as well, and see how people react. And like if I notice that like people would need some clarification, I would probably say, hey, I can do it. And after a pause, I would say that this means that I will actually do it. And maybe this is the deadline that I commit to.
It's interesting because coming from a native German language, for me, can do is also the ability to do it, but not necessarily committing to it, because even with the same phrase, you can express, yes, I have the ability to do it. And then you really literally say, like, I have the ability, but I don't need to. You really clearly say this. And like with intention, you say this, yeah, I have the ability, but I don't need to, right? And
for me, it's simply offering a hand. It's not committing to something.
Right, and then the communication should continue, right? You say, I can do it, and then the person probably has the right to accept your help and keep communicating. It's like, how do we do it? What's the deadline? What's your commitment, right?
Like playing the ball back to you and say, like, you can basically say, nice, thank you for you taking the task. I will assign the task to you, basically. Right?
Now I'm wondering, I mean, the reality in many companies, especially startups and scale-ups, so let's say international environments, the business language in those companies is very often English. It's not necessarily German. And the reality is that we have a lot of people talking to each other which native language is not English. So whenever they hear something, they might translate it back in their mother tongue, where it has a completely different meaning.
What I just did, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this causes a lot of inefficiencies that we see in communication, and especially if we don't think this through. And I'm wondering if people who always claim to prefer international environments are aware of these consequences. And I'm wondering how to prepare those people, but also how to prepare the companies who also need to offer a hand or a guideline in understanding the different languages and way of communications of their employees. So actually, I'm just thinking this through. If you really would take it literally, you would need to offer intercultural workshops to make people aware that some phrases might have completely different meanings and cause different expectations. When I lived in China, for example, for a couple of years, I had such a workshop before I left. And one of the biggest insights was in Asia, and especially China, the word no is not as frequently used as in Europe, because it is, it would mean that whoever says no is not able to do something or doesn't know, which is like losing face, and losing face is the worst thing you can do. So people just not say no. They might give you a speculative reply. The station might be that way, or it might be this way. And if people join such an international workforce, an international company, I think it's worth to make them aware of the differences. I'm not sure if this is actually done.
And this makes it also so interesting having Asian people in here in Berlin, for example, or in Germany in general, in the international context. Because I feel like we often have feedback for Asian people in our international context. Because we still live like a kind of mixed Western culture with all of its differences. It has differences, but still we have such a wider difference of like what communication means when we have Asian people among us,
And the other way around.
And the other way around, yes. I see one German person who is very well integrated into the Japanese culture on TikTok, and she behaves so differently from what I used to from a German person. She is so like, she looks like a German person, but she behaves like a Japanese person. It's so cool to see. You need to check this out.
Absolutely fascinating topic, and I'm also wondering. We have a lot of nationalities at Zalando. Like I don't remember the exact number, but over 100 for sure, 100 something. And we see and we work with all people all around the world. I don't know. Like going back to workshop idea, Oliver. Probably the main goal would be to raise awareness there, but I am wondering if it would be even possible to seriously consider all of the differences in all the cultures and languages and come up to some, very, very specialized, tailored pieces of advice. I would like to offer one. It's not a silver bullet, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that. And I think this is coming from aviation and like controlling the plane in the air. And usually there are two pilots. And I've never seen that myself, but I've read a book or an article that they over communicate, and this is written in their instructions, right? Like if I'm taking control and I want to pass it over to you, Birgit, right? Then I will say, Birgit, I'm giving control to you, and then you have to say, I'm taking control, and then 1 second later you have to say, I took control, and I have to confirm, like, I don't know, some other phrase, like I understand that now you are taking control, right? So it's clearly over communication. This is not what we do in a life. Actually, I started doing that with my wife as well a long time ago. I think like it is well accepted. Sometimes it's excessive and sometimes it sounds weird, but at least it helps us avoid, some weird situations.
I can see that working, honestly.
Okay.
I play volleyball, and with a friend of mine is playing handball, and I see how like real-time communication. And by the way, I also played World of Warcraft in very like core gaming, not being paid, but still like super like trying to be competitive. And the type of communication is super different from casually playing something. So when I play something, whether it's sports or esports, mostly it's competitive. And the type of communication there is crucial. So you don't have unnecessary communication, because every unnecessary communication will lead to taking the attention away. Everyone is focused on like trying to achieve to win. So which means like any other communication that doesn't lead to gaining a point or like beating the boss is definitely not within this realm. So when you have silence, you have silence. This is your focus time. well, when something happens, the group needs to real-time reorganize. This is something, by the way, that you don't have or very rarely have inside the office. Then the group is talking, and the group needs to talk efficiently, which means sometimes you have very precise words. And I give you an example of where miscommunication can come in with one word that means like ja or I. So when the ball comes, so someone has served in volleyball, the ball comes really with a lot of speed, and let it come between two people. Who is taking that? Someone needs to decide, and boss can say I on it, or boss can say nothing. And then maybe they can also just move just quickly. And this is also communication. To signal to the team that they are taking the ball. So which means this is like the crucial communication, real-time communication, that where you need to be quick in order to communicate to the team that you are taking responsibility for whatever comes super quickly, super in speed. And sometimes they measure the speed. You can see it on TV, how speedful this is.
I'd like to go back to your idea of over communication. At first, I was a bit puzzled, and then I realized that it makes so much sense. And whenever I witnessed an effective communicator, I saw that they're actually over communicating to make sure that everyone gets their point. And you can see this right away when someone replies and not doing it. You can immediately see a break in this communication. There is a gap that is then not addressed. And this, if it's a conscious leader who over communicates, always has to take this into consideration as well. So over communication doesn't stop because it needs to be aware of everyone around them. And when we first talked about how to make communication efficient, Eugene, we also talked about the military style of writing emails. And I remember that I've mentioned this to you. Have you had the chance to look into this topic?
Yeah, I Googled it. But maybe better if you present it.
I didn't. Please let me know what it is and how I can improve my communication.
I saw that in a small company builder that I worked with a couple of years ago. It was basically a startup. And in startups, you have, by definition, very often young people who might not always know how to communicate properly because they simply lack the experience and the training. So we had an ongoing chain of emails, an entire blast of emails and Slack communication. It really blew my mind. It blew the mind of everyone in this company. And then there was one guy who came up with the military style of writing emails. And he started to implement that whenever he wrote emails to the CEO, which mailbox was much more full than the mailbox of everyone else. And everyone else had also full inboxes, right? And there are two elements that were really crucial. The first thing is it starts with the subject line. In the subject line, the first word is a verb, very often, that already gives the intention of what to do with this email. For example, it can be action. The recipient needs to take a certain action. Or sign. A CEO, a team lead, whatever, needs to sign something. It already implies that this is really important. Or decision. The recipient needs to take a decision. Also sounds quite important. Then you have info, which is like FYI, for example, might be not the first priority right now. Or request, or coord, like coordination. So you can see right away if this email is important or not. And after the verb comes, of course, a very short description in the subject line about what this email is about. And second, in the email itself, you start with a bottom line. And you try to keep the email as short as possible and always implying what you want the recipient to do. It always comes with a specific question a specific expectation on the reader. And when he started to write emails that way, it changed the communication of the entire company. It made it so much easier because also here people were coming from different cultural contexts. They perceive things in a so different way. We had people from Asia, from Russia, from Western Europe, from the US, and suddenly they knew what is expected from them.
This
Do you
is
think
very
we
true,
should?
very true.
Do you think we should have the same sort of style as well inside Slack messages?
Like a required field whenever you type in your message.
Like, I mean, I can start with the action word, right? Or like with this word that I'm typing in, right?
I hope this is the question to Oliver, right? Because I don't know.
Well, it's to both of you. You both have experience with Slack and Teams and whatnot.
I think so, yes. It can be used also for Slack messages, but I believe there also needs to be a channel where people can just chat around, because this is also a human need. Communication can't be always efficient. When you talked about your experiences in sports, Birgit, I thought, yes, people are focused, they're concentrated, but to be focused, human beings can only achieve that for a certain period of time. Being focused for 8 hours a day is something humans are not capable of.
Yeah, there are certain levels of being focused. You can have like a medium level focus for 20 or 30 minutes. This is also the duration of how like some boss fights actually take. But the high level focus actually takes 3 minutes, and then you totally lose the focus because of lack of energy. And this is why some games, so psychology in gaming basically, some gaming sessions only take 3 minutes and not longer.
So the question, yes, in Slack messages, you could also use this military style to keep it short and efficient, but you also need to allow people to just have a friendly chat.
Exactly, and I think this also comes to how I structure my text. Eugene, do you have any tips on how we can structure our text so that we can, like, keep the focus and not spend it on unnecessary text?
Absolutely, I think we already touched a lot of topics, and yeah, like going back to your question, Birgit, probably no, I would not implement in Slack messages, and exactly for a reason that you, Oliver, mentioned, that Slack is a medium. This is a typical default. Companies can operate different ways, but a typical default is that messages on Slack or Google Chat can be missed, and like nothing bad happens. But it is usually expected that whenever you get an email in your inbox, then you read it. At least this is how I behave as well, and we can probably touch topics of writing emails that actually make people open that and read it. And then going back, like this would be a very good first tip, right? Start with the action, and if there is the deadline, specify the deadline. If you expect an action from a person, start with that action. It can go back to this military style. Oliver, you mentioned a few labels like act, right? Or like decide or whatever, and you started with the verb. What I would personally, I really like this idea, and I do this quite often. I try not to overuse it, because when everyone starts putting urgent labels, then essentially everything becomes non-urgent, right? I try to avoid things like coordinate, because that would be very unclear to me. Like what does it even mean, right? It's like, what do I need to do to start that coordination? And I also usually don't do FYI messages, info messages, because those are like, again, they do not imply any clear action from the person who's reading that. And I perceive it as my job. Like if I'm writing an email to someone, and we started with the goals of communication, right? Usually the goals are to change something. If I don't want to change anything, this means that I'm happy with everything, right? And probably don't even need to communicate. But if I write an email, that usually means that I want some people to do something for me. And I try to help them to identify what exactly they need. Sometimes it's really hard. Like I already see, Oliver, maybe you're gonna object on that, so I will object myself first. Sometimes it's really hard because sometimes it isn't like I don't know what kind of actions that may imply for other people, and yet I try to be very transparent in those cases. I write my message, and somewhere like closer to the top, I can openly say, look, I don't know what it might mean for you. Could you please help me figure that out? Could you please maybe write back to me and tell me what it means for you? And if it doesn't mean anyway, write me. So I will probably note it somewhere, and next time I won't bother you with the same type of communication.
I was just thinking about different company cultures, and in some more traditional environments, companies, but maybe also the public sector, there is this this way of trying to keep everyone in the loop with FYI messages, or with putting a lot of people in CC who then might need to know something or might not, or might need to act or might not. And very often this is not done with a lot of thoughts, you know. Very often the sender thinks, oh, this could be relevant for A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And this starts the entire chain of communication, especially if the email is not written thoughtfully. So it produces the noise we are all sick about. So FYI messages, as you said, are really a mess. It's a plague if not done intentionally. If you use it in the way you have just suggested, like, this might be important to you, I'm not sure, help me to find out if it is and how it impacts you, that's a different thing. But if you put like half of the company in CC, what does it reveal to the recipient, you know? It might mean that this is a huge thing everyone needs to be aware of. It might mean that you don't have, let's say, the authority. This is why you also put your team lead, your head of, the C-level, and the entire shareholders, like everyone who owns just a single stock in CC. I mean, it can reveal so much, and it's not efficient at all.
And this is, you know, it also happened to me. I also observed it as well. A situation like this where I wonder, does it need to happen? Is there a need for this to happen, that almost everyone is involved? Because so it happened that like a big decision needed to take, but it also happened that in order to take a big decision, you also need to have a lot of information about it, because there was not much of information. There was unclearness, like no one knows the current state, no one knows what could happen with, like no one knows possible solution and what could be the impact of the possible solutions. Also, no one knew what everyone, like what the stakeholders' goals were, what their needs are, and so on and so forth. So it happened that there was a meeting previously with 5 to 10 people who had an impactful influence inside this company. This meeting grew into like a 30 people and more meeting, also including executives, yes, but also including hands-on people who had an influence, hands-on people who had like quite the knowledge about the infrastructure. Not only about the infrastructure, but also on other departments, other fields, such as like how should like the brand look like? What do we need to do with marketing in this case? A lot of people had a say into this, according to the crowd. Yeah. And from the coaching perspective, I ask myself, does it need to happen because something has not happened before? Yeah, maybe we need to ask ourselves that perhaps the structure of the meeting was not right, but we need to have these people included. Yeah, so in order to have a proper conversation, listen to everyone's opinion, to get the information, and so on. And this is what I wonder. I have a different topic also, a different situation that I would like to bring into this topic. Eugene, what do you think of this situation? As a consultant, I was in one company who brought in a way of like how you can identify yourself when you log in with the two-factor authentication. And so the company asked the employees to take their personal phones, in order to do the two-factor authentication. And we all know from our knowledge as leaders who lead other people that this is not within the employee rights in Germany. DSGVO, right? So GDPR in English. And as a consultant, I had become some feedback about writing this message as an email to the people in charge who would like to change this, who would like to take this in effect. I wrote basically, hey, this is a situation. And the other things are possible solutions. But it took I think I have started to do a wave of a lot of people have moved something in order to make it possible, because I seem to have done something transparent. How would you make it differently? How would you make it better? This type of communication, because what I saw from my perspective is that if people don't take action, there might be one of those 500 employees who could possibly sue this company for not taking care of GDPR, which we're taking quite seriously in Germany. And I also got the feedback that it was too long with too much information. How would you make this differently and better?
Very good task for me. And now I have to resolve it in 30 seconds in the right way.
Maybe. You can pause the video.
So just to summarize what I've heard, you had to write an email, and in that email, you describe the situation and propose solutions, and just send it to many people.
No, to one person.
To one person. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's figure it out. What was the goal of your, let's take this specific communication, right? What was your target state?
The task of being a consultant is to consult the company of bringing in good culture, bringing in good and good company culture. In this case, there was something that I noticed, which was specifically in my realm, but still, if you notice it, you can write a message, right? So this was my intention.
Yes.
My task.
If you have the target state in mind, right? Or if you have the change in mind, you wanted to change something, and you decided that writing this type of email would lead you to that goal, right?
As a consultant, and this is why I'm bringing this up. As a consultant, you can bring this topic up, but the decision in order to change something is still up to the customer, right? So in this context, it's not my intention to change something. It's my intention to bring it up, because the customer still decides whether to take this information and change something accordingly, or to ignore this information. And this is also the goal of the consultant, why they're acting differently than someone who is actually hands-on and executing something.
Yeah, I have a pro tip, and maybe you can try it out, or you can ignore as a consultant, right? Now I'm trying to consult you. Whenever I start specifically an email, and every time I want to start with I message, maybe it wasn't the case, but you will see how I lead to my tip at the end. Whenever I want to start my message with I, I would like to inform you, I'm excited to share. I released the new product. I stop exactly that moment and try to change it in a way that it's going to be pointing on you, the reader. Like, I'm excited to share. I'm usually just skipping, or maybe I'm like moving it to the end, right? I released a new product, or we as a team released a new product. How can I say it differently? And like, people don't like reading about myself, right? People like reading about themselves, right? And how it affects them. So I would probably say something like, you might be affected by our release, or you might benefit from our release. Let's figure it out if that's the case, right? In your case, maybe if you would put it on the very top saying, you might be sued, and like that, and that amount can be millions of dollars if you don't take an action, and then you continue your message or put it in a separate document, doesn't really matter, right? It already points like the whole attention to the situation and the consequences. And they might disagree with that, right? And say like, no, I might not be sued. And then they might even skip all the rest.
They can take the risk, for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good advice. Thank you.
Oliver, do you have any other recommendations for Birgit?
My first thought was keep it short, because the longer the email gets, the higher the likelihood of not being read fully through. I, as a recipient, would think if I don't know how long the email was, but the first,
it wasn't that long, but it was already too long for the person.
Yeah, exactly. I might have thought like, just come to me and talk about it. Why do you take so much time to write me such a paragraph? But obviously, some emails need to be documented in a written way. So there is a fine line. And especially if it's a topic that the recipient don't want to deal with, because it sounds rather like an not so pleasant topic. There's already this resistance, to deal with the email, to read everything through, to think about the consequences. So I think pointing out the benefits of acting very early in the text might help that the reader actually cares about that. Why should I care is, I think, the most important question to be answered.
So which means the value, like presenting the value also at the beginning in a short way, is very beneficial for the reader.
Yeah, because as a recipient, and it sounds like lead, head of C-level, whatever position, I'm confronted with problems all the times. People bring problems to me and expect me to solve them. And as a consultant, the expectation is also different. Like, your customers maybe hire you to bring solutions and not just another problem. So keeping it short and offering the benefit of reading it actually also increases the perceived benefit of your service. This is how I would think about it.
Yeah.
And of course, I now took the time to think it through a couple of minutes in daily life. Time is precious and sometimes not be found to think it through. But I think this makes the difference.
Exactly.
And I'd probably really emphasize the benefits, because I have an example from private life that goes a little bit into the position of what you're saying, Oliver. We got a mortgage here in Germany early this year, and I had to read maybe on 100 pieces of paper in German, the language that I do not really understand. I took my time and I read it all. And it wasn't even written at the beginning that, hey, if you don't read the contract properly, you might mess up your whole life or your financial situation, right? But because it was kind of understood by me, like we took the weekend with my wife and we really went through all the documents carefully, trying to understand what's written there. And even like that was a legal language, right? I even used ChatGPT, like literally pasting some pieces and saying like, hey, explain this to me in like normal language that I would understand, right?
Yeah.
So it really goes into like what kind of either benefits you get or what kind of punishment you might get into if you don't read this message. And I've tried it myself. Like, it's not a nice way, but if I really had to make people read an email, I would do something like that. Like, hey, your data pipelines will fail if you don't read it to the end. And people read it.
And now
if they care, if they
email. I
It's
just
like
had
a
another thought.
catchy headline for a newsletter message.
I
Oliver.
just have another thought that I want to raise. It's also something that we thought and talked about over the last weeks and the previous sessions. Let's face the facts, like knowledge becomes available at every corner of the world through AI and other solutions. So the hard skills are not as important anymore as they have been in previous years. What becomes even more important are soft skills, namely communication. And what we are talking about here in this specific example, writing emails, this is what makes the difference. This is what gets you the promotion that you actually want. This is that gets you the project that you want, being able to communicate. And whenever I talk to candidates or clients, I am really amazed how much this is underestimated from both parties. Candidates who fail to communicate not just their achievements, but also their needs and desires, also their shortcomings, who try to put a mask on. I know that this is natural. Everyone does that. But it's not what gets you the promotion. And same goes for the clients who fail to think about the recipients of their service, but also of their offers. And the offer can be a different thing. It can be the job, it can be the service, it can be the product. And the more or the better this is being communicated, the higher the likelihood of getting what you want from both parties. It just came to my mind. I know that this sounds very random, but the decreasing element of hard skills is something that is often talked about, but I think we haven't really understood the consequences yet.
But this is actually a really good topic because we also need to display good communication skills in interviews, right? Are there some tips that candidates can take in order to display good communication skills? And as a hiring manager or recruiter, what do I need to check in order to look for good communication skills?
That's a great question, Birgit.
Eugene?
Yeah, I will share 2 tips from the candidate's perspective. I worked, like I helped recruiters a lot, so I know that side a little bit as well. But from the candidate's perspective, the first one is to be concise, because usually interview is limited in time, and some candidates tend to kind of tell the whole story, and many times it's not necessary. If the goal is just to demonstrate the skills, then keeping the message short while achieving the goal is probably the right way. The pro tip that I did myself recently, I think it helped, I hope so, is to build up a conversation with the recruiter. Many times it goes as question, answer, but anyway, recruiters share their thoughts as well, or maybe share something about the company. And then if the candidate brings it back to the discussion, saying like, hey, Oliver, you just shared 5 minutes ago that you're from Germany, or maybe your company has this type of culture, and connecting it to that, basically making it a conversation, not just the skill check, I feel like it helps a lot to build that necessary rapport.
I just thought about a situation that I have witnessed as an applicant. And honestly, some recruiters make such a conversation like an interrogation, but it's not a conversation. It's not an interview. It's what you have just said: question, answer, question, answer. It is boring for both parties, really boring. It doesn't produce the necessary insights, because if you do it like that, question, answer, you don't manage to build up a relation, and you don't manage to open up the people. A conversation like this, question, answer, this doesn't need a human being. You know, this can be a Google form, to be frank. And if I see how interviews are being done like that, I feel so offended, because this is wasting my time as a candidate. It's also wasting the time of the recruiter, and I'm wondering why it's being performed like that. When I interview people, I always try to build up a relation to them, because I wanted them to open up. I don't want them to tell me what they think I want to hear, because it might be the complete opposite. I want them to be authentic, and this needs trust. In order for them to be authentic, they need to trust me. So I also need to reveal something for myself. I'm not talking about childhood trauma. You know, this might be too much, but being authentic produces the insights that both parties need. It's not just the recruiter who needs the insight. It's also about the candidate, who need to decide if this is an environment suitable for the person. And if I then see recruiters who, you know, read out their questions, Eugene, if you are confronted with a situation, would you do A? Would you do B? Would you do C? I'm wondering, like, are you kidding me? Is this what you have learned at school? Like, no, this is a Google form. You are a Google form.
You could do this within an app as well.
And you know, as
Exactly,
a
just record and time box it, right, and then send the video at the end. Done.
As a recruiter and as a business owner of a recruitment agency, I see so many ads with AIs doing exactly this. Question, answer, question, answer. You don't need a human being to do that anymore. So human recruiters should focus on trying to build the relationship. This is what they are here for. It's not for getting all the questions answered. Sometimes it's better to have a good answer for 3 questions and not for the other 10. This is much more insightful, because you get to know the candidates on such a better level, because you see the reactions, you see the change in their voice, in their tonality, in their gesture, in their mimic. This is so much more important than the plain words that they might speak.
As a hiring manager, interviewing candidates, I actually have way less questions than we have for the preparation for Tech Talent Talk. Yeah, so I have 3 to 5 questions for a 1-hour talk, like this length what we have right now, and we still fill it with lots of content. And this is because we are creating a conversation. We are also going deeper, but this is a conversational going into the depths. And I have often we come to topics that are not within like the minimum that I need to ask. These are the 3 to 5 questions. There are often more aspects to the candidate, and we are just naturally come to this. And this is quite cool, actually. Eugene, do you want to add something before I ask the last question?
Absolutely, just the last word. I don't know if it's the structure or policy at Zalando. I haven't participated in any interviews here yet, but as a one who takes part in the recruiting process, I'm really big fan of unstructured interviews, like you mentioned, Birgit. There should be probably some skeleton, but then the conversation can go this way or that way. And even technically, right? Like even on technical topics, we can start discussing different aspects of the same problem. And then you really see what encourages candidate, what they like about, what they might not like talking about, right? And you help, like whenever there is a difficult question, you help them, right? And you see how they react on the help, because this is like probably even more important than skills, right? How they work with the teams, how they defend their answers, or maybe not defend, but they're open-minded to all of the possibilities. Exactly. Yeah. So I really like to say it means a lot of work for the interviewer, because this is actual cognitive effort, not just reading out loud from paper. But I'm a big fan of this approach.
I want to add something here because I once worked for Zalando, so I know how the interviews are going. And I think in Germany, Zalando is one of the few companies who actually have a really structured approach to conducting interviews. An approach that doesn't focus on hard skills only, that also covers the necessary soft skills. And this is already a very solid foundation to start to actually hire people, to know what you're looking for. Many companies don't do that, or they have a very limited perspective on that. To be aware that they are necessary hard skills. Some of them people need to bring already. Some of them you can teach them. But very often it's about the soft skills that really determine if someone will be successful in the role or not. If someone is not good in communication, it takes so much more effort to teach them how to communicate properly. And in comparison, trying to teach them, let's say, the fundamentals of marketing or coding in a specific language takes also an effort, but it's less effort than working on the soft skills. The soft skills really determine if someone will be successful or not. And especially in times of AI, this becomes even more true. And what I also like is, of course, everyone who participates in the interviews has a certain angle to cover. And afterwards, people will talk about the different angles, about the different insights that they have gathered. And if a recruitment process is done well, you see one story, one candidate from different perspectives, and you see how there is a picture that comes up like puzzle pieces that are being brought together, and the picture becomes more and more clear. It doesn't mean that they have generated always the same insight. They have seen a different shade of this candidate, and this makes it very interesting and very insightful. And afterwards, those people are also able to provide proper feedback to this candidate because they have seen different shades.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree.
Cool. We're at the end. I would like to ask Eugene a last question, and this is our signature question. And this is, what is the most positive interview experience that you have had?
I won't share specifics, but I had one. And that was the one where I was receiving feedback after every step. And like now going back to your point, Oliver, because everyone is investing time, it's really important that that time is invested smartly. And the company was very transparent about the feedback, about my performance during the interviews. But also this was this type of conversation. So we would casually chat about topics that we find important, and it really felt like it wasn't the opposition, right? And everyone is trying to defend themselves. They try not to hire me, and they try to get a job, right? But that was a common goal, understanding if I was a fit for the company and if the company was a good fit for me as well.
Thank you, Eugene. And we also thank you for being here, Eugene. And
thank you for inviting me.
The next session will come in 2 weeks' time, and we look forward to the next session as well. And until then, we see you dear audience, as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.